Good afternoon, automotive fanatics. It's Peter, your automotive fanatic, coming at you guys with a big project today for the Tesla. What we are going to do, and I'll get right into it, we are going to install a set of coilovers for the Tesla. Now, the Tesla community, a lot of people have been wanting to lower their vehicles. The options that you have are going to be coilovers or springs. I chose to go with coilovers over springs, and I'll tell you guys why. For those of you who want to install springs, it's a great option to lower your car. The disadvantages though with springs is the fact that you have to replace them in conjunction with your OEM shocks. They're not designed to work together harmoniously, so you may have a chance where you're going to prematurely wear your OEM shocks out. And sometimes people that have lowering springs, they will tell you that it is a little more bouncy than you expect. Now, the advantages with springs is the fact that it typically is much cheaper than coilovers, and there is a market for spring purchasers. So if that's something that you want to do, all power to you, no problem at all. Springs will work out well for you. Now, for individuals like myself that want to have more control over their suspension, you have coilovers. The big advantage to coilovers is the fact that it is a one component system. And what I mean by that is you've got the spring as well as the shock absorber that is designed to work together. So you're not going to have that bouncy effect that springs may provide, and you're not going to have a premature wear on the shock because the valving that is made with that setup again is designed to work together. So it's going to be much more complacent, a better ride overall, and again the system is going to work harmoniously together. Now, here is potentially a disadvantage to coilovers. A lot of people will tell you that coilovers typically will ride a little rougher, and in some instances it can, but it's also very dependent upon the coilovers that you choose. Later on, I'm going to tell you guys who I went with and why this coilover setup might be a great option for your Model Y or your Model 3. So the suspension company that I am pairing up with here, or at least using, is called Flat Out Suspension. They're located back east, and they have been in the suspension industry or the platform for many years. All they do is suspension, so you can be assured they know what they're doing in terms of their research as well as development. So let's go ahead and dive right into what we have from Flat Out for the Model Y. We're going to take a look at the coilover setup. This is going to be your front coilover setup, and just taking a look at it, it's well built. This piece right here is going to be your cast aluminum lower that essentially goes like this here. You guys will see it later when I do the install, but just I wanted to take a look and tell you guys about the build quality from Flat Out. This cast aluminum setup here, the welds look fantastic. I don't know if you guys can see here, but it definitely looks like a pro did this and they knew what they're doing here. Here you've got the monstrous rear spring for the Tesla Y and its perch that it is set up on. Aluminum, nice and light. Here you have the rear shock that's going to go again in the very back. The nice thing, it's going to go like this here. This, I believe, you've got your adjustability points here. I didn't show you guys, but most of the time you've got your adjustment in the front right on top. So you have easy access with coilovers here to adjust your level of dampening. Now flat out with these ones here, you have a total of 20 different levels of adjustment. So you can make it nice and plush and soft, or you can turn it all the way up to 20 and shatter your teeth. Whatever you guys want, that is the adjustability. And then you saw that there's a lot of turns or levels of adjustments on the coilover itself. And again, that's one of the main reasons why I chose to go with coilovers, is you have an infinite level of height adjustability in coilovers as opposed to springs. Springs is kind of like you set it and forget it type of style. But for me, I am very OCD about height, and if the front or the rear is higher or lower than it should be, you're stuck with that height of the spring. You can't do anything about it. With coilovers, you can really level it out to how you like. If one side is typically higher than the other, you can adjust it according to how you like. One of the other big reasons why I chose to go with flat out suspension is the level of quality of the parts that they use. I took a look at their spec sheets on the different components that they use, and I'll tell you again, nothing against imported stuff, but nothing is made in China. A lot of the things that they use, from the valving, the steel, the aluminum, the pistons that they use, they're either purchased or based out of Japan or the US. So you know that you've got very good quality. And check this out. This is something that you do not see in a lot of the coilover or spring manufacturers. They even force test their setup. You've got the front and you've got one for the very back. So it's just another customized level for owners who buy it to know that their products have been built with high quality. So I am very excited to get this setup on the Model Y. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and dive in. To install or access the very top of the coilovers or the shocks, you do need to remove a few things. Now you guys have seen me, I have essentially removed the entire front frunk cover, and it's really easy to do. There's essentially about 4 bolts that you remove. There's going to be a top cowl that comes off here, so you'll remove that. And then you're going to go ahead and remove the frunk right here. So the frunk liner needs to come out. This empty spot that you see here, that's going to be for your air filter. So you're going to remove that as well. And then what that does is it allows you access to this area here, which is going to be your top shock, as well as over here. And then on the driver's side, this here is the windshield filler neck, and it just pulls right off about halfway, so very easy to do. The first step in removing the front suspension is removing these 3 bolts here. These are going to be 13 millimeters, so you'll go ahead and remove those first. Now coming to below, what you'll go ahead and do is you're going to need to remove the speed sensor, which is located right here. That's going to be a 10 millimeter. And then from there, just simply remove this here, and then you're going to set the speed sensor aside. From there, let's go ahead and remove this pinch bolt here. This is going to be, I believe, an 18. You remove that. The way that you want to get this out, and it's a little trick, you're going to compress this here. That allows you to pull the bolt out. So you'll go ahead and remove that there. Then you can go ahead and remove this sway bar end link. That is going to be held in by an 18. This star that actually locks it in place is going to be a T40. Let's go ahead and just go back to this bolt here. I forgot to let you guys know. This is going to be a T50 star bit as well. And what that does is it holds it steady so that you can remove this 18. So once you've got that there, we're going to go ahead and go down. This is going to be the lower shock bolt. This is a 21. So go ahead and remove that. So what I'll do here is I'm going to remove all of those items, and that essentially will allow this shock to come down. So we'll do that real quick. Now that we have everything off, I wanted to show you guys how to remove this. There is just no cut and dry way to say this, but you have to somewhat really manhandle this, because you've got to essentially pull this out. The Tesla manual says that you want to push the control arm up so that you can get this down and out. So let's go ahead and give that a shot real quick. Okay, so this here kind of comes out like that, and as you can see, it gets stuck. So you have to kind of push on your hub and everything here to get it down. Push this control arm up a little bit. We almost have it, just a little more. All right. Okay, so let's see. Pushing up. Okay, so you see that I just cleared it out here. Be careful of all the wires. And then from here, you're going to essentially slide it out this way and just maneuver the other side through there, just like that. Here we have the OEM and the flat out suspension coilover, and I thought it would be a good point to really talk to you guys about how to properly set this up and why, again, I chose this type of coilover setup. Talking about the aftermarket one here, I don't know how some other manufacturer setups is, but with flat out you have the main shock body, and then you have the lower piece here that will actually thread into the shock body. The reason why I went with this type of setup is, as you can see, when I thread this up and down, this is how you actually raise and lower the car. You're going to thread it into the body, and this is going to be to lower it, and then when you're doing this here, you're actually increasing the ride height. The main advantage with going with something like this, it does not impact your spring rate at all. Your spring rate is going to be constant because, for one, you are not changing the shock travel, but you are physically changing the ride height by adjusting this here, and that is a huge advantage. Some other manufacturers, this may be as one, and to raise and lower it, you would do it from here. You'll raise and lower the spring, and what that does is when you are actually raising the spring by dropping it down here, you might have a little play. Now when you are trying to lower the different type of coilover setup, what you're doing is you're taking this spring and you're actually compressing it, and what that does is it makes the spring more stiff, or it changes the initial preload. Okay, and what that does is it makes your car ride really, rough. And the big thing, it reduces your shock travel. So not the ideal setup if you are buying a coilover that, again, this part is all one, and the way that you raise it and lower it is going to be here, and you're adjusting that ride height. Again, not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is having an independent ride height adjustment that does not impact this spring rate. So with this one here, what we're going to go ahead and do is, again, we're going to thread it into the body here. I am going to adjust it. You guys can't really see here, but let's turn this around. I am going to thread it up to about 3/4 of an inch as an initial guesstimate. Flat out suspension recommends that you do about an inch to start out with, but I'm going a little more aggressive because I want to have a lower ride height. So we'll do that there. Leave the spring preload as is. They set it at 0. The way that you are going to adjust the preload, and I'll try to do this as best as I can, you're going to essentially turn these sleeves here to where the spring starts going back and forth. And then from there, you want to turn it where the spring no longer moves up and down. That is 0 preload. Flat out suspension recommends about 5 millimeters of preload. So what that means is you just continue to turn this up to 5 millimeters, and then that is the preload they recommend. So I'll go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and put this all together, and then we'll install it in the car. For the install of the new coilover, here is what I would recommend that you do. Again, you're going to put this kind of the same way that you brought it out, at an angle onto the axle. Just be careful of the top. Okay, all right, and then you got to push this up once again. Okay, so now that this is in, believe it or not, the top hat, it has to go in a very specific way. And let's make sure that I've got this correct. Okay, that is the correct way. Here is what I would recommend that you do. You want to put a jack underneath, and you want to slowly jack this up so that the shock goes up and into the chassis. Once you have that up into the 3 little holes, go on top, screw them in, so that way you're not fighting the weight of this here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. And then, okay, so I got the shock up. I put the 3 bolts so that this could sit the way it is. Now we're going to go ahead and kind of lower it and put things in, such as the pinch bolt, line everything up. And I'm going to do that, and I will let you guys see. Everything is in at this point. I have all the bolts not necessarily torqued down, but they are secure. Something I did want to let you know about, a little mistake that I made that you guys should avoid. When you are putting this shock in, make sure that this here is actually behind here before anything else. Otherwise, you can tell I I cannot get it in. It's a pretty easy fix. What I have to do is I just have to remove the bolt on the lower shock tower that holds it in. Just pull it a little this way and then I can get this in. But again, make sure that this is behind here before you get this in. So I will go ahead and secure everything. I'll torque it down. I will provide you guys the torque specs as well so that you can properly do it. Here we have the rear suspension setup, and it is actually pretty easy to do for the spring removal and shock assembly. Now this is going to be a cover and you need to remove it. There's a little bolt right here, that's a 10 millimeter. You're going to remove that. This cover will come off, okay? And what that does is it allows you access to two 21 millimeter bolts. On the other side there's going to be a nut, so you're going to have a socket here, and then on the other side an open-end wrench or anything to kind of hold that. You'll go ahead and remove both of these. Now I want to tell you guys, before you pull these bolts up, keep in mind this shock is under a tremendous amount of force. So I highly recommend that you put a jack here. You're going to jack it up just like such. What that does is it keeps the tension on this spring so that you can slowly lower the jack and release some of that tension. Now, if you are simply doing a spring install, that is pretty much it. You don't need to touch the upper part of the shock at all. You'll just, again, remove this. This allows the assembly here to drop, which I'll show you later, and then you just take out the spring and replace it. Now, if you are going to do a coil install, let's go ahead and take you guys up here. Shock, you'll see one bolt right up here, and if I just simply remove this here. Now, here's the catch to loosening this. This is going to be a rubber grommet, and all you have to do is you just simply pull on it, and it again goes around that rubber grommet. What that does is it exposes that other bolt right there. Those are going to be a 16 millimeter. You're going to go ahead and remove those, and essentially what will happen at that point, the shock will drop and then you can go ahead and replace it. So we have the jack stand here putting some tension on the spring. I went ahead and removed both of these, or at least loosened them. Now what we'll do is we'll just simply pull these bolts out. We'll slowly level down or lower down the jack, and we'll be able to take out this spring as the first step. If you guys are doing a spring install, again, this is the OEM spring. You have the bottom cushion, and then you have the top cushion of the spring. When doing the spring, it is very important that you reuse both of this. All you're going to do is you're going to take it off, take the new spring, put these back on, reinstall them onto the vehicle, and that's it for the spring install. Since we are doing a little more in terms of coilovers, we're going to go ahead and talk about that next. Now we get to the point of the coilovers that you have to take the OEM top hat and install it on the new shock. This is a little more complicated, but it's nothing that you guys cannot handle. First thing you need to do is you need to remove this dust cover, and as you take a look here, you'll see there is a bolt down here. Ideally, if you have like a pass-through setup, you put it just like that, and let me see if I can show you guys the pass-through and how it works. So here is the part of the wrench that goes in, and then you're going to stick an Allen in here, and you're going to essentially break loose the bolt down there. The other option is you can always take your impact gun and just torque it right off, which I will do since it's much faster. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then from there you're going to take this top hat, you're going to put it on here. If you have, again, that pass through, you're going to put it on here, and then you're going to torque this down, and I'll show you guys how. With the OEM, it has a dust cover as well as a bump stop. You do not, and I repeat, do not reuse this on the new coilover. It comes with its own, so you're good there. And then from here, what we're going to go ahead and do, we're going to put this new, or I'm sorry, the OEM top hat back on here like such. Screw it back on, and depending on the manufactured coilover that you pick, the torque spec on this typically varies between 25 and roughly 30 to 35 foot-pounds of torque. With the setup that I have here, I'm going to be going on the more aggressive side, and I'm going to set this to 35 foot-pounds of torque. And here we have the rear spring setup with the adjustable perch. This part is going to be the very top, and if you take a look at this here, I went ahead and removed this from the stock spring. I put it on here, and then the top also had something that goes on top of this adjustable perch. Here is the spring. Now I did want to show you something that is very crucial. Let's go ahead and just kind of rotate this. You see how this spring here ends here? You want to make sure when you're putting this on, it has to be seated all the way down here. A lot of people don't do that, and what that does is it causes some height differentials on both sides. So just make sure that you do that properly. So we'll go ahead now and take this whole setup and put it into the car. The very next thing that I went ahead and did was I put the spring in. Here you see the bottom of the control arm, or the spring tower that it sits in. Right here you're going to see the adjustable perch, and what I did was I went ahead and adjusted this to roughly 1 inch, and that is just an arbitrary number. Yours may differ depending on how high or low you want to adjust your car. So I just made sure that this side and the other side are going to match. Again, the spring is in. Here is your shock. And we haven't put the bolts in yet. And what I did was I used the jack to raise this section here so that we can put and level the bolts in. So what I'll do is I'm going to put both of these in. I'm going to secure everything. And while I'm at it, let's give you guys the torque specs. The 2 bolts here is going to be 114 Newton meters. The 2 that connect the shock to the chassis is going to be 41 Newton meters. I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. And we have the final outcome of the rear. Shock is installed, as well as the adjustable spring height. And there you have your adjustment knob. So really great looking setup. And here you have it, the final install of the coilovers. Everything has been torqued properly, and we are going to go ahead and put the wheels on and go for a drive to make sure there's no funky noises and do the final height adjustment in the coilovers. Now that the vehicle has the coilovers fully installed, it's important to discuss with you guys a few things prior to you going through the final process of the coilover install. Now, if you are simply installing springs, this next portion that I talked to you about is irrelevant because springs require no type of adjustments after. It's kind of you set it and forget it. With coilovers, one of the biggest disadvantages of going with them is the fact that you do have to do a final, I'll say, adjustment. Now currently, we really do not know the height of the Model Y because I just set it to an arbitrary number or a height, and I cross my fingers and hope that it's close to what I want. Now I will say a caveat. This is actually day 3 after the coil install, and here's why. Once you finalize, or once you have the coilovers fully installed, you need to drive the vehicle around for just a little bit, and what that does is it settles everything. It settles the shocks, it settles the springs, and your car will slightly lower based on the vehicle weight and the type of driving that you do. So now that we have it back up on my lift, here is the things that you need to do. The first thing is you need to measure your ride height prior to getting back up. I recommend that you guys drive around the vehicle, find a very level surface, and from there, go ahead and measure each corner of your car. That gives you a base on how high the vehicle currently is. Then you're going to go ahead, put the car back up on the lift, and you're going to go through the final process of the coilover install, and that's going to be adjusting the rear springs height-wise, as well as adjusting the front coilover setup height-wise as well. In addition to all of that, you also need to decide how stiff you want the car to ride. My initial dampening setup, I put 10 in the rear, 8 in the front, and just an initial drive, it drove very nicely, but it could have used just a slight stiffer suspension ride. So what I did was I just adjusted it evenly at 10 in the back, 10 in the front, drive it around for, let's say, 500 miles, and let the shocks further compress, adjust whatever they need to do, and then I'll make a final dampening adjustment at that point. But going back to the height adjustment, what I'm going to do with this part is I'm going to adjust the height of the vehicle to exactly how I want. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start the final process of the coilover install. Here we have the front suspension, and just a basic nomenclature of the suspension. You have your locking collars for the spring. This, if you did it correctly, as I showed you earlier in the video, it should be nice and tight. You want to go ahead and snug these together very securely. This here is the lower locking spring so that the shock body doesn't move. And what you will do is you'll take one of these spanner wrenches, put it in here, and you're going to unlock it like such. What that does is it allows this to turn up so that you can turn your shock body down. Now here is the catch to lowering this here. If you can take a look, I have a little mark here, and what that does is when I'm spinning it, it allows me to know once I've made a full revolution that I can properly count the number of revolutions that I've turned. So just kind of a pro tip here to make your life a whole lot easier. So now what we'll go ahead and do is we're going to turn. Since these are both locked together, to turn or lower the vehicle, you want to obviously go down. So you need to use the very top one to turn it. Now obviously you can do it with your hand like this, and as you can see, the shock body is actually lowering and we are not impacting the spring rate at all. Alright, so just like that, we're getting to 1. And 2. So I'll probably go 2, and I believe let's see if I can kind of give you an idea. I wanted to show you guys how much 2 did, but I didn't mark this at all. But I believe with 2 turns, you're going to come down roughly between 1/8 of an inch. Actually, no, more or less about 3/8 of an inch. So we have 2, which I believe is going to be good on this side, because initially my driver's side was slightly lower than my passenger side. So I will say and call it we are good. We turned this 2, and then what we'll do, we're simply going to just lock this back in just like that. Okay, alright, so now it's locked. You guys did see that this turned a little bit as I was locking it. Might be a good idea to use another spanner wrench to catch it like this, so it locks the top, and then turn it and it'll lock the very bottom. And that is it to the height adjustment on the very front. You'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side, but you'll turn this in accordance to what matches for your height requirements. Here we have the rear coilover suspension setup. Now, most vehicles that you need to adjust the rear coilover setup, it's going to be a little more involved. With the Model Y, it is no different. The first thing that we need to do is we need to essentially freely loosen this spring. Now, this one does have a perch, but I don't know if Flat Out forgot to give me a spanner wrench for this, but there's no way for me to really turn this. So what I need to do is I need to essentially drop the suspension again to be able to access that spring and make the adjustments to the spanner wrench. Now, I was able to remove everything and get access to the shock as well as the spring and the perch here, and as you guys can tell, I went ahead and reduced the ride height by spinning it up. This was a little more of a challenge because I needed to literally compress the arm down here so that I can get the spring out, but that is complete. Now the final step to this here is we actually need to match the shock height to the free ride height of the spring. Now if you take a look down here, it might be just slightly difficult for you guys to see, but I'm gonna kind of move this around. The hole for the shock is a little lower than the arm here, so let's go ahead and just kind of pan up here. If you guys can see this part, we're going to go ahead and simply turn this. I'm going to have to unlock it with a spanner wrench, but then we can turn this shock body up to match this down here. And frankly, it is a little of a hassle to do, but my honest opinion, I think it was very smart of the suspension company to do that, because now when you are matching the free height of the spring as it's resting, you are actually getting the full compression of the shock. Some other companies don't do that, and what happens is when you are lowering it, you are also essentially shortening that compression stroke. So I don't think that is the best way to do it. Flat outs setup here, I think, is going to be the best way. So I'm going to do that and move on to the other side and match it to what I did over here. So what do you guys think about the coilover install on the Model Y? For me, this has been a no-brainer upgrade. I absolutely love it. I unfortunately didn't have an onboard camera to really let you guys see how the car handles and how it drives, but I can tell you in its current setting of 10 for the dampening in the front, 11 in the back, the car rides better than stock. Turn-in is just ridiculously fast because you've got a little more camber when you lower the car, and that most of the weight now with the center of gravity is a little lower, so the car just handles exceptionally well. Little bumps are not a problem. It seems as though the springs, in conjunction with the upgraded shocks, is absorbed more by the setup as opposed to the stiff OEM suspension that was on the vehicle before. Keep in mind, because you have adjustable dampening, you can once again stiffen it to as much as you like to really get that firm stiffness, or you can actually lower that dampening down even more so that you have a more subtle as well as comfortable ride, and that's really personal preference. I like how it rides. I may change it later on down the line, but for the time being, I'm going to leave it as is. Hopefully this DIY and the review of flat out suspensions coilover setup has brought you guys good information, as well as being a good alternative to some of the more expensive coilovers that you will find. I do want to go ahead and ask you guys, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel. It definitely helps me move up the chain in terms of potential viewers that I can assist with further DIYs on the Tesla, as well as other vehicles that I run across. As usual, my automotive fanatic family, I want to thank you for checking out another one of my videos. This is going to be Peter, your automotive fanatic, signing off until the very next time, my friend.